Hello and welcome to this episode of Esports Next, brought to you by the Esports Trade Association, alongside my co-host Mickey. Mickey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to thank you for having me on.
Oh my gosh, it's always better when you're in the room laughing at my jokes. So, y'all, thanks for listening. We're so excited today to have Jim Welch from the Dev House joining us. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's our pleasure. We're so excited to take a dive into your orchestrative development company. So thank you for joining us. You want to kick us off, Nikki?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please, tell us a little bit about, your company and, how it gets started and, what brings you here to us and, to Esports Next. So,
Yeah, I'll try to prevent boring you from going into like the deep recesses of my past. But yeah, to at a kind of high level, Dev House is a development studio, as the name kind of suggests. We focus on building games, both for our own games, our own IP that are obviously entertainment software, the traditional video game you get on Steam or Xbox, PlayStation, But then we also do client work, and so we work with brands and different clients to build either kind of, again, entertainment software, video games, or kind of game adjacent things. So it's using game engines like Unity and Unreal to build experiences. Maybe it's a location-based VR experience where it's still, kind of game-like, but it wouldn't be something you would play on your Xbox. And so yeah, we've been doing that for the last 6 years or so under the name Dev House. Before that, I worked for another number of agencies that did similar work.
okay, cool. You mentioned VR. Actually, I think that's like the new buzzword about like, along the industry right now, VR, AR, and all that stuff. Is there a difference between developing, a game traditionally versus like, an AR or VR experience?
Yeah, it's a very different design challenge. So I mean, when you're working with, let's start with VR. So on a VR title, the way you locomote, the way you move through the environment is just totally different. In fact, we just had a design meeting on a game that's going to be for both. So what you call flat screen, which is like traditional gaming, and VR, it's going to be for both platforms. And we kind of blinked over the idea that like, hey, these cinematics where you take control of the camera and give these users these experiences, like of course that doesn't work in VR because then you get nauseous and sick because you're throwing the camera all over, and it's one of those things that are like obvious while you're doing it, but it's easy to forget, and you have to kind of make these design concessions and changes. Also the way you hold a weapon if it's a shooting game,
Yeah.
for a PC game, it's like you can just go down the iron sights. It's a hit of a button. For a VR game, you probably want to physically hold your hands up, so it feels more immersive. So it's a bit of a different beast. For augmented reality, that one, I think the closest video game we can think of to that technology often is Pokemon Go, because that
Yeah.
blew up so big. And so
Yeah,
so
definitely.
so there, I think it's finding the right balance of gimmick. Like it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, it's like you can honestly just turn off AR for Pokemon Go and play without it, and the game
Yeah.
is arguably just as good. But the AR adds some fun bits. So you have to find that balance of like, well, where can you introduce augmented reality that doesn't get too complicated? Like, oh, I can't detect my floor, the light's too dark, I can't play the game now. And so those are some things you have to consider, lighting and environment.
Okay, cool. So I think what are the biggest challenges versus like, things that can carry over from like, development between like, a what my friends call flat games and like like VR games or even AR games.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely consistencies where if you get something right on one, it can translate to both, right? So your core game loop, it often can be very, very similar or the same loop for both of these, but that is deceptively challenging to make that fun, right? So when you're designing a game and you kind of say, okay, the player is going to, collect a resource, they're going to spend that resource on their base, and then they're going to, get more weapons to go collect more resources. Like, great, that sounds simple and fun. And then you build it and you're like, oh, that's really boring. And why is it boring? And this other game I played was so much fun. Like, what are we missing? And so there's so many small, subtle things that you have
Mm,
to build in, little, particle effects, the way the UI scales up and down, and like all these little subtle psychological elements.
mhm.
Most of the time, those often translate across platform. You might have to tweak them slightly. Again, VR is different with camera. You can't do UI on the screen because VR needs world space UI
Yeah.
and things like that. So you have to sometimes solve them slightly differently, but if you can solve them really well on one platform,
Mhm.
that will translate across to some degree.
Oh, that's awesome. What are some like fun projects you've worked on? I know, like, we all
Yeah.
have our favorite, we all have like, projects that we're like, oh, I don't want to see that ever again.
Yeah,
But there are
yeah.
some projects of like, ooh, I wish I can do that multiple times, right?
Yeah,
So,
I won't throw any clients under the bus and say projects we didn't like. Those definitely happen. But I would say, we really enjoyed working on Aliens Fireteam Elite.
ooh.
That game we are brought in to work alongside Cold Iron. And so that was, if someone's not familiar with the title, it's a, PC, Xbox, PlayStation title. And it's a third person shooter in the Aliens world. And so we got brought in to build an additional horde map, and some other tasks along with that title. And it was really fun just because what you would call external development or co-development, you get to work with another studio and you get
Mhm.
to onboard onto their processes, right? So every studio has their own unique tools, their own unique workflows. When you're working with a client, sometimes those can be friction points because maybe they're coming from a world of maybe traditional software development. It has kind of different rules, and so you have to fight against that a bit.
Mhm.
When you're working with another game studio, it's might be different, but you're working towards a very similar goal and with very similar tools, and so you kind of speak the same language. So most of the time, it's a really cool learning experience. Like, oh, this is how you solve that problem that we also face. So that was a really fun project. We got to build a lot of cool environments. We got to, work on the design of, like where the xenomorphs come from, what type of xenomorphs, how dense the spawning is. So that way it's, the right level of challenge, and getting that difficulty right for every mode of difficulty was interesting because it's so subjective. Like what's hard for one person is not necessarily hard for another person. And so
Yeah,
finding out like where those lines are was really interesting. So yeah, that was a really fun project we got to work on.
that sounds so cool.
Yeah, it does. What's the what's the point that an average business might say, maybe we should make a game out of this?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question because I mean I think it's going to be a little different for everybody. Most of the brands that come to us, they feel a little bit of FOMO on the space.
Yeah,
They're like, oh, like everyone's doing a Roblox map, we should probably do one, right? And so most of the time they come with that sense of like we don't want to get left behind, which is okay. I mean, ideally we love the people who are pioneers and who are the ones who are like, hey, let's make our own game. Like we often reference the KFC dating game, which is like just this crazy thing, but it's like a game you get on Steam. Like it's not a Roblox or a Fortnite map. It's like a proper video game made around Kentucky Fried Chicken, and it's hilarious and genius. But so those are like the pioneer brands, and so a lot of times they are going after that. Like, how do we be innovative? How do we be interesting? But the majority are like, hey, we're seeing trends. We see trends in this space. How do we get involved? And then they come to us often with that question, and then we kind of can present, okay, well, here's the budget ranges because they often have no idea. Like we don't know
right.
anything about building these. So we give them budget ranges and then often we ideate with them about what could be a fun map, how to leverage their brand in an organic way so it doesn't feel just like a big commercial.
Well,
Okay.
I'm gonna ask. Mickey reads my mind. What is the entry budget range?
Yeah, I mean it's gonna vary from studio to studio, right? So if you find, especially with those types of platforms like Roblox and Fortnite, you have a lot of creators who are individuals and who aren't necessarily studios with overhead, and so they can work
Yeah,
for lesser rates. For a studio of our size, we're about 16 full-time developers. We have a studio that's behind me right now. So we have to cover those overheads as well. And so for us, a small map that we're willing to kind of take off other opportunities are anywhere from like a $50,000 engagement but then they go all the way up to, seven figures if we're doing a full, maybe not on like Roblox or Fortnite.
Sure.
Those would be pretty big spends on those platforms. Those are very trend-based ecosystems, so it'd be very dangerous, I think, to spend a wild amount of money on those platforms. But for like a Steam game or an Xbox game or PlayStation game, that's when you tend to get into the seven-figure budgets because it's hard to build something of the quality level you'd expect on those, which is a whole interesting topic in itself. The quality expectations for all these different platforms are very different.
Oh, ooh, talk about that a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
I think that'd be interesting because I don't think people, at least the average, person, I don't think understand like, the what is it, the challenges before, developing for like all of like, these different platforms, versus just one. And I think that's why exclusive titles usually are always better because, you're just developing for one platform, right? So you can go all in and trying to optimize it as opposed to like, trying to make a concession for all different platforms.
Absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, right now we're working on a to be announced title that is going to be on VR and PC and console. And the PC version, the client wants super high fidelity graphics, and that's going to have to be there's going to be some time dedicated to downscaling that and making it be supported for like lower powered systems. But yeah, no, I think for the brands especially, I think platforms that exist like Roblox and Fortnite, for example, are the two primary ones. Um, they want to, I would recommend, and I think it's important for them to focus on smaller kind of quick responsive builds. So if you look at the community and what's popular, it's not really intensely high fidelity, super complex game mechanics with lots of features. It's often something silly or very, red versus blue in Fortnite is like the core, like it's like, all right, there's two colors on a fairly plain map, right? But it's designed in a way, by people who know the game really well, and so they know what weapons to put there. They know how to pace it to make it engaging. And oftentimes they've built a community over the long haul. If you want to kind of get in quick, like let's say you don't have any history in these platforms, then you need to leverage a trend. Like, hey, this new video game is coming out. Like when Pal World came out, a whole bunch of Roblox and Fortnite maps came out that were Pal World games, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
they're not going to be the level of depth, and that's kind of the point is that you wouldn't want it to be because in 3 months, then it's going to be something else. It's going to be whatever the next gaming trend is right now. Now there's probably Helldiver maps out there, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. I
And
hear about it all the time now.
so yeah, I mean, I think that's why on those ecosystems, you want to build a smaller. Uh, it sounds like a negative thing, but like a lower quality, lower fidelity experience, so that way you can iterate on them faster and be able to move on to the next trend. It's more akin to social media.
Yeah.
It's really all about that content. It's like what's the newest content, what's the newest trend, and you can't spend a year or 2 years following a trend. It's already moved on.
Right. Who doesn't want to talk to you? I mean, it's so interesting that you're ahead of this incredible marketing phenomenon, really. Um, I would like to go back to how you got into this.
Sure. Yeah. I have a really it's interesting, I know, because people keep telling me like, oh, that's really interesting. That's your path. It felt slow and organic when I was going through it, but yeah. So initially, I started in music. So I went to school to college for music to be a composer, and so I was writing music for film and trailers and more linear media, with always the desire to get into games. But it was just so competitive, and so linear media seemed like an easier route early on in my career. And so I went to school for that. After I graduated, I moved out to Dallas here and started working for a company called Funimation. They do much of anime work. They recently were acquired by Crunchyroll, so anyone watching now would basically know them as Crunchyroll. It's formed into one company. But yeah, so I was doing that and then game stuff on the side, and then eventually that grew. Just I kept sticking with it, and I started to do game audio full time and became a freelancer. And then through that, I eventually was like, I want more. I want to like do more in games. I want to like have more. I have more to say and more to contribute than just the sound. And so I started producing games and like, oh, I'll just get my buddies that I've met over all these years and we'll make a game. And before I knew it, everyone was cruising along, but then the programmers would get booked somewhere else, and I couldn't afford their time, and I couldn't, ask them for free work all the time. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, let me just hop in and see if I figure it out. And then that led to me just basically learning how to code. And then that led me down a path of really falling in love with code. I got into the startup world a little bit just because there's so much focus on early stage, products. And so I did that for a while, just making random, software startup things. And then eventually, when I kind of went through that phase, I came back to games, and I started writing code and for games and game adjacent stuff for agencies. I worked for a bunch, Groove Jones, Sector 5 Digital, a bunch of these agencies that work in that space. Eventually got to ExxonMobil as their virtual reality subject matter expert. And I personally was bored there because I was used to the small, very, very like rapid building, and they're a massive company, right? I mean, they're like
Yeah.
Fortune 2 on the Fortune 500 list or something
Yes.
insane like that. So for me, it was like a very, like, from the startup world to that, it was night and day. And that was a good wake up call for me to say, this isn't what I like to do. I like to go fast and like and break things and like do some really cool stuff. So yeah, left Exxon and started DevHouse, and that was about 6 years ago. And I've been running DevHouse since then. And I found work for myself, and then I got busy and hired another person, and then another person, and then I just sort of organically grew the studio as I got busier. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
That sounds amazing. Oh my goodness. I think that's as someone who like, that's as a little girl, that's what I wanted to do, get into like, developing and like, creating games and all that stuff. I think that's yeah, that's it's I think what is it? You never lost sight of like, what you wanted to do. I think that's amazing. That's really cool.
It's always a balance too. I think I don't know if advice is the right word, but like a thought that I have is that, ultimately, I would love to just create whatever I think is like a cool artistic expression of, like, what is the coolest game I want to make? Or when I
Yeah.
was doing music, like, what is an album I want to write? The trade-off for me, I guess, finding success was prioritizing what clients need, right? And so
Mm,
so that is there's always pros and cons. And so if I wanted to fully focus on like my personal vision of
mm.
whatever I think the next coolest game is, I probably wouldn't have been able to pursue this as a full-time career. It's a trade-off. And so for us, now we're getting the time to some degree to build our own game, but it's always in contrast and in conflict with the time for the client work that keeps us all employed and keeps the studio alive, which, in this current market for game studios is really challenging. And so yeah, I mean, it's really, really cool to get to work in this space, but it is one of those, like, when you make it your job, it's less of your hobby. And so like I still love making games, and I do work on it at home, but it's it's not as like
Yeah.
it's not like, hey, I just get to build whatever coolest thing I would love. It's like, yeah, I gotta work for clients to create the experiences they would like to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who like, follow our passions and like we get to that point where we like, when our passion becomes our job, it's a different experience altogether. And some of us, would leave and say, hey, that's not what we wanted to do anymore. But how do you keep balance, I guess? I think a lot of us out there who
Oh,
are like,
that's a good
will be
question.
saying, yeah, how do you keep balance
Yeah.
between, what you like to do versus like, what the clients want to do? Because personally, like, back when I was actually doing a lot of freelance stuff, working for clients, I think that's something that like I struggle with. It's like, balancing between what I think is what is it, it's the way to do it, and what the clients want, and how do you marry the two?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's patience, because a lot of the
Mhm.
times, the client's always right, and so we make recommendations based on what we think, but ultimately they're spending their money on this,
Mhm.
right? So it's their right to make what we might see as wrong choices, and we could be wrong too. They might present something that we don't see the vision for, and then we build it. And we're like, oh, that was actually a pretty cool idea, and that happened a lot in music for me. Like early in my career, we'd have a brand manager that would say, hey, I want to create this track for this trailer. I want you to do it like this. And I would think, I don't know. I don't think that's the right call. And then I do it. I was like, you know what? That was actually pretty cool. And so early in
Mhm.
my career, I kind of learned that humility, that, there are a lot of times that I'm can be wrong. So that helps. But then the patience comes in where it's like, well, hey, if we do enough of these projects, it will allow us to have enough either savings or a large enough studio, basically more resources to dedicate to what we want. And so it's sort of like paying our dues. It's like, yeah, we got to do this work. We got to follow this client request, and that will help us reach where we want to go. So I think it's still separate. Like I think I sort of accept I don't get to necessarily build in my ideals into every client project or even
Hmm.
most, but knowing that I will have an opportunity in other places to do that.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's really great. What are the pain points? What would you tell someone getting into into development for and design for games? What did you not see coming?
That's a good question. What did I not see coming? Yeah, I mean how I think the difference of a good design on paper versus how it comes out in implementation. I think early on, everyone who gets into this typically plays games. You know, you
Yeah.
don't start building games unless you like playing games. That would be a weird path otherwise. Maybe it exists, but I haven't seen it. And so you kind of know games. You're like, hey, this is fun when this happens because I had fun. And so then when you go to build it, whether or not you're the designer on a project, you're still going to influence your portion of that project with your own biases. Like there's so many subtle things that you can do that aren't written down in a design document that you have to bring to the table. And so just that surprise of like, oh, this didn't work like I thought it would, and that preparation for that, I think, and building that into your timelines and your expectations, and then just the patience of like it's going to take some time. I mean, I've been doing this a little over a decade on just the code side, and you know, we're not a massive studio. We're not like we don't have some hugely successful title out, and we're still growing, right? So we're still on a journey. You know, 10 years into this for me. So yeah, having patience and expecting that to be surprised by your designs not being right, and then trying to hunt down why they aren't right is something you don't expect. I think going into it, you're like, oh yeah, I'll just make it like that game I love, and it'll be fine. It just doesn't work like that.
Do you have a story of when you were surprised, like the biggest surprise of like, from paper to the final
Delivery.
product?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like one large one, but just one that's off the top of my head. We were building a cozy game. It was like you were a little cat in a world and you go fishing. And so it's like a cozy fishing game with a narrative arch that you would eventually get close to your grandfather and like learn about your history and all this. And so it's like,
Oh
okay,
my
yeah,
God.
we get cozy games, we get, we have these cute characters, cool, like great. And then we built a little demo world and you're running around it. All the animations are great. The world looks beautiful. The characters talk to you. They have cute little gibberish sound effects to it. But it just wasn't engaging. You're like, okay, what do I do? Like, where do I go? It's like, oh, go fish. It's like, okay, like I guess. Like it just wasn't compelling. And so like it was just such a it was like yeah, and it was like discovering all the subtle nuances that we take
Mm.
for granted in the games that we love that they're
Oh,
really,
yeah.
really hard to notice. And I think even if everyone's different and some people might have an affinity to design and they just get it and it's just their first try it
Sure.
hits, of course. But there's just that level of like all those subtle little nuances that you won't notice unless you're
Right.
really actively looking for them. They all add up. It all makes a difference. So that was a good example of like, okay, and then we iterated for a couple months. Just
Mhm.
okay, let's try this. Let's try adding these bees that chase you. Okay, let's try adding this new character here. Okay, let's add a quest system, even though I didn't want quests, but like it gives characters direction. And so yeah, just kind of exploring all those things organically.
That's
Jim,
interesting.
it is. We're so excited about your agency and the success you've had and what you've done there in Dallas. Tell us what you expect to do when you're at Esports Next and
Yeah,
you're talking to the audience and all the people that are coming and the members. What do you want to share? And, what's the goal of your panel and what panel are you on?
yeah. So I'm going to be on a panel talking about basically getting brands into esports.
Cool.
And so ultimately, I'm hoping there's going to be maybe two types of people in the audience. I would love brands to be there, and so they can understand, more about where they can play, like what are the different platforms? Can they make a custom game? Can they make a web game? All of these types of questions they likely have, budget questions that, you asked. That's, I know, obviously going to be a big one. And so being able to kind of provide context to where now whether they come to our studio or another studio, they know the questions to ask with some context and have a foundational understanding of like where they might want to go. The other type of kind of person I hope to be in the audience is people who want to build these experiences and hearing, you know, what we do and the challenges, sort of similar to the conversation we've been having here.
So there's the early adapters. Can you name a few of the earlies and then who you think will be there that are kind of the next phase? Watched everyone come in early, spend their money, make their mistakes,
Yeah.
and now ready to come on in.
Yeah, I mean, Nike's been really good about being kind of front and innovative. And so they aren't afraid, I think, to go big. I don't know if they're necessarily always like the very, very first to move, but they make a significant move into
Yeah.
these spaces, and the quality level is very high, which to me says a lot. It's one thing just to like throw your brand logo in an experience, because that's low risk because it probably costs you very little. But all the Nike experiences I've seen have been really, you know, I don't know all the exact figures, of course, but they've been significant investments because these have been really, really polished experiences. And that's in both, you know, these Roblox, Fortnite, as well as the word is kind of weird, phygital, like the physical with digital elements. So like you go to a
Yeah.
store and there's digital elements that you can interact with. They've been really innovative in that space. As far as who's next, I mean, I think it's going to be ideally smaller businesses, small and medium businesses, right? So you see these big brands making moves like the Walmarts and the Nikes, the Amazons, you know, all of these larger companies. So it'd be great to see smaller, you know, more maybe local brands or kind of finding audiences in these spaces. Obviously, they would need to make much smaller investments, much simpler maps, but just being able to kind of like play in that space and kind of introduce themselves to a market through a game, you know, just as they would any other marketing avenue.
I
Great.
guess, yeah. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, it's not good. Yeah, so let's say these like, smaller to medium like businesses would like to, dive in or like learn more or like, take to the first steps on like what is it? Entering like the space, like what are some things that, they need to think about or like, what are something they need to do in order to like, make this the most effective for them, like, in terms of investment versus like, the deliverables. So
Yeah, I think being playful with their ideas. I mean, especially on these platforms, like fun, funny, silly, these sorts of adjectives are effective, and they connect better with people. I think if you're trying to come in and be too serious, it's going to be more challenging. You're going to have to work harder to find a way to make that work. So yeah, being playful, not being afraid of kind of making people smile, and that would be one bit of advice. Also, potentially collaborating with other brands. So, like, let's say you're a smaller business, it may not make a ton of sense for you to have your own map, but maybe a bunch of businesses in a similar space or similar region, maybe you create something, you know, where you have a shared space, but you have your own little corner of that map. That could be something that could be cost effective and still showcase your brand.
okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
The industries, I'm wondering too. Like, do you think the cities will start to do some things? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
we're
hoping to see that myself.
Yeah, we're finding that with augmented reality experiences. So we've done a number of AR tours where you go to a certain region of a city, and whether it's interacting with local art like murals and things on the wall, or purely like, hey, in this spot, this historical thing happened. And so you can open it up and see a recreation of that historical event in that location. Those are something we do actively for clients. And I think taking that to kind of more gaming centric, you can go gradually, like you can start adding gamification to those apps, which I think is really powerful. Or you could go like, I live in Dallas. There could be a Fortnite Dallas map where you run around the city, like you could recreate the city on a smaller scale, and that could be really fun for people who live here. Be like, oh, I know that place, you know, and we get to have, combat around there, and it's fun and memorable. So that could be really powerful.
Cool. Can you tell a little bit more about like, the AR experience within cities? Well, like, what have you done so far? Because that sounds really, really interesting. And I think that's going to be something, I think a lot of cities should take advantage of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, we've done a number of them. It ranges from kind of more like tours, like almost on the corporate side, like campus tours, like, hey, I need to know where I'm going. So you have like a GPS element with a custom map. And so you're like, oh, that's where building 1A is, and I need to get there. And then when I get there, though, there's some kind of cool AR animation that teaches me something about what happens inside that building or history about the company, right? So we've done massive campus tours like that. We've also done art walks, which you walk through an area that has a lot of murals, and you point your camera at the mural, and we've built animations and things that happen when you point your camera, and they come out, and they feel like they come to life, which is a really cool way to get foot traffic around that
Mhm.
area, because they're going to do that, then they're going to probably stop and get food, right? So if you're
Yeah.
a business in that area, you could kind of collaborate with your local businesses and build something to get more foot traffic. We've also done something that's more, again, historical. We're actually really close to where JFK was assassinated, and so we recreated that motorcade where you can see the history of, where he drove down, all the newspaper articles that came up with it, those sorts of things. And so without that, right now you go there and there's just kind of a marker where you're like, oh, this is where it happened, but that's the
Yeah.
only information you get. But now with this AR experience, you can see where the car drove, the path it took, how many escorts he had, all this stuff that you could try to read, but ultimately seeing it happen in front of you in augmented reality is pretty powerful.
You know what I think's cool is that you had this music, an orchestrative experience, and then you bring that into the game. That is just so special, that you followed your path. And I think it's also really cool that you're coming to Esports Next and you're sharing your, knowledge. You get to a certain place in your career where you want to give back. And we're so grateful for that. What kind of things can we expect in addition to what you've already shared? Is there a question like everyone's asking you? Is there an intake form? Is there like, what do you see coming? What can be a little teaser?
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to see what the UEFN Fortnite world is feature set wise is doing lately.
Yeah.
So if you're not closely watching that, you might be surprised at kind of what is capable now, because now you don't necessarily need to look like a Fortnite character. You can look like something else. It can be a side-scrolling game. It could be a top-down game. So that platform that used to be like, hey, if you want something that looks like Fortnite with your brand, cool. But now it's much more wide open, and it gets more interesting every month when they do a new patch, right? So talking a bit about what's possible on that platform will be an interesting topic that we'll cover.
That'd
Well, we
be
have a couple
great.
more minutes. Did you have any more questions, Mickey? I'm sure you always have a few.
Oh, I have so many questions for him, but yeah, no, it's been a while since I talked to like, a developer and like, especially on the gaming side. I love it. And I've always I taught like game design too for a little bit, and I like making games. I don't have time for it anymore. But yeah, so I think coming from the education side, like, like as a kid, who wants to learn, who wants to actually get into like, this business, what advice would you have for them?
Good
I like
one.
that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great question. So take action. It's easy. Ideas are a dime a dozen, and so like that's the two biggest, I would say, mistakes that we see from young developers and young game builders is that they think their idea is going to be what's special, and so it's like, okay, if I can just find the right studio to make my idea, that's going to work. So the idea alone is not the important part, it's the execution. So
Mhm.
make sure you remember to execute on an idea. So you need to build it yourself, or you need to have your friends, or you need to take action and do that. And then the other is to not go too big too early. So try to build a lot of very, very small things. And that will give you so much experience. And I got that kind of organically through working in agency models, because often they're quick turnaround. So it's like, hey,
Mhm.
we got 30 days, we got to build something for this conference, that sort of thing. So if you don't have someone forcing you to do that, do it yourself. Like make a game about a trampoline and just one mechanic. Like I can jump on this trampoline. How do I make that fun? And like no inventory, no like feature cut, feature cut, feature cut, and try to make something really cool and finish it, and then go on to the next one.
Mhm.
And so yeah, remember, it's not just the idea, and also try to finish things, because those are
Yeah.
hard. And then put them somewhere so people like me can see, like if you ever want to work for a studio and you come to me, I want to see your portfolio. I want to see what games you build.
Yeah.
And so throw them up online somewhere, at least a video capture of it.
That's the best advice. I mean, I just have to say, it is so easy to start anything.
No,
Being,
that's very true.
it was, man, my grandfather, who was a triathloner, would say, you know, there's just one finisher trophy. Anybody can have a, you know, and they can join any race, but finishing is a, I think it's what helps you set aside from the rest, because you're building your portfolio, and I would rather see 10 small projects than, you know, one huge bang. Just
Yep.
it just shows so much about character and tenacity and just, yeah, the quality of finishing. Well, we're really looking forward to seeing you. You're July 8th or 9th?
8th.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And for anybody out there that is looking forward to talk to the genius himself, Jim Welch, you can be found on LinkedIn, which is where I found you. But where else do you like to be contacted? Are you on Discord or email? What's best?
Yeah, I'm kind of old, and so I don't use Discord as much as the younger folks. I need to use it more, but we do. Yeah, so LinkedIn's great. That's kind of my main social media platform. I am on a bunch of others, but I don't check them much, to be frank. The other way to connect with us is we do have a studio Discord, and so we're actively building that. We just started that actually, I think a month ago, so it's pretty brand new.
It's
So
fun.
yeah, so like if anyone kind of hunts me down through my network, they can find the Devhouse Agency, find our Discord. Maybe I can send you a link later to it, but yeah, they can join and they can talk to any of us at the studio. The whole team is on there.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, Mickey, you want to take us home?
All right. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody for listening and watching. And thank you, Megan, for being with me and helping carry these conversations. And I look forward to seeing everybody at Esports Next, July 8th to 9th. And if you're joining the NASCAR party, we'll see you at July 7th. So thank you.
Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Devhouse with Jim Welch. Thank you very much. Another great episode of Esports Next. See y'all in July.